Morning, colleagues. Good afternoon. We're just giving a couple of minutes for more participants to join. So we'll start soon. Give 1 more minute to give time for people to connect. We're seeing a good number now joining the webinar. Number. So, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Varanya Chow, and I'm the Global Inclusivity Advisor at the UNDP Climate Hub. It is a pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on behalf of the United Nations Development Programme and the Youth4Climate Initiative. Thank you for joining us for this important deep dive on inclusive climate action, gender equality, and Indigenous knowledge in practice, particularly in the context of youth-led initiatives and project design. So as we know, the climate crisis is one of the defining challenges of our time, but is it not gender neutral, and it does not affect everyone in the same way. Climate impacts often fall hardest on those who already face structural inequalities, such as limited land ownership rights, exclusion from decision-making, and lack of access to services or infrastructure. Inequalities are based on gender, race or ethnicity, age or disability, among other dimensions. And many times, and more often than not, these inequalities intersect. Structural inequalities therefore shape who has access to, for example, to education, land, finance, decision-making, and opportunities. Women and girls, Indigenous peoples, youth as yourselves, and marginalized communities many times who are on the front lines of climate impacts and many times experience these structural barriers. That is why effective climate action must also be inclusive and gender-responsive climate action, since these actors are also on the front lines of solutions. So when gender equality and social inclusion are integrated into climate initiatives, we not only advance justice, we also strengthen the effectiveness, sustainability, and impact of climate solutions. So today's session is designed to help translate these principles into practical approaches for climate projects and the development of these proposals and initiatives. So during this webinar, we will explore why gender equality and social inclusion are critical to climate action and introduce some of the core concepts around gender, inclusion, and intersectionality that are essential for designing effective climate interventions. We will also hear firsthand experiences from our panelists and share practical tools and entry points that can help ensure your proposals are gender responsive and social inclusive. And we will try to help you to clearly demonstrate these elements in your project ideas, moving beyond general statements to concrete actions that show how different groups will benefit and meaningfully engage and participate. So we hope today's session will provide you with practical insights, tools, and inspiration to strengthen the inclusiveness and gender responsiveness and impact of your climate work. So thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to a rich and engaging discussion. So without any further ado, I will give the floor to our first speaker. And I'm going to then ask our colleague Anna to turn on her camera. And we will start this session introducing gender equality integration, core concepts, also how it interacts with other social dimensions, and key lenses such as intersectionality and share practical approaches and tools for climate projects. Ana Rojas, who is the gender specialist at the UNDP Rome Center, will share with us all of these good aspects and concepts to make it clear for everyone. And please don't hesitate to ask all the questions that you may need. So the floor is yours, Ana. Over. Thank you.
Thank you, Irania. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and I hope you can see my screen. Waiting for confirmation. Perfect.
Yes, we can see your
I
screen.
see a lot of thumbs up.
Yes.
Brilliant. So let's get into the matter of why it is that we're here and what it is that we're talking about when we're talking of gender equality and social inclusion. And I'll be brief because I think the most important part would be to give more space to other colleagues. But let's just get started with the fact and the understanding that gender equality is a fundamental human right. We are all individuals who should have the same access to rights, opportunities, and protection from discrimination, irrespective of our sex or our gender identity. Unfortunately, this is not necessarily the case. No country in the world yet has been able to achieve gender equality. According to the latest version of the Women Business and Law report, still globally women only enjoy 2/3 of equal economic opportunities worldwide. Only 4% of women are actually living in countries that are close to full legal equality. It could take us anything between 150 to almost 300 years to achieve full equality, depending on which source you're looking into. And this is because the way that we understand, the way that we interpret what gender is, which is different from sex, which is a biological situation, but gender, which is a social construct, means that we are adding layers of understanding, but also of limitations to what it is that we may interpret as being, in this case, in a binary manner, as being typical of a woman or a man. And that means that because we are putting some of these constructs, we end up not creating a level field, and that we need what we call affirmative actions to make that shift. And this also means, and then it's also very important to understand that gender is not the only form of exclusion. If I'm talking even from a binary point of view, which in the view that we divide the world between women and men, but we need to understand that there are also other genders and other identities. If we are not acknowledging that, we are already starting with a level of exclusion. But there are also other levels of exclusion, like not taking into account a person's abilities, ethnicity, nationality, orientation, even the age. It is very possible that you, as young people, feel excluded from spaces of decision making, that you feel that your knowledge is not necessarily accepted or recognized in the way that other people's are. And this is important because we are not homogeneous groups. These layers help us to either be closer to the possibility of access rights, access benefits, or be limited by it. So whenever we're doing our work, it is very important that we take this into consideration. And what does this mean for addressing gender equality, for addressing social inclusion? It means that we are called to use tools, systematic approaches that help us understand how these social dimensions, how the construction of gender identities and other identities, how these are potentially affecting the people that we want to work with. And this is very important to acknowledge because it's different to have a gender approach where the goal is to be able to empower people by increasing capacities, skills, um, self-esteem, and understanding of the context. That is very different from working towards gender parity, in which we're just trying to have a kind of 50-50 balance in terms of participation. So there is a very important qualitative distinction between having a gender approach where you understand the context, the needs, and engage different groups to understand how to tailor your solutions to their needs, versus what I call the counting of heads in a meeting, right? Having 50% or a 30% of group in your meeting does not necessarily assure you that they will be feeling free to speak up, or that you will be able to identify their needs. And this is why when Berania was speaking at the beginning, she started by saying, well, the work that we do starts with what seems to be very simple questions that are the construction of our gender analysis. But we need to make them, and we need to follow them in a systematic manner to have that more granular understanding of who it is that we're talking to. Because in your work, you may want to have an improvement, let's say, on mangrove restorations. But unless you understand the difference in participation between who is taking use of that mangrove and to what extent they're engaged, you'll come up with limited results. So perhaps when you're thinking about ocean and aquatic conservation, the first thing that comes to mind are fishermen, right? And we see that only 15% of those who are harvesting, who are involved in fishing activities globally, are women. But if we take a step back and we see then that 90% of those engaged in the processing are women, we have an understanding that we have to open our glance to see who is actually going, for example, into the water, who is the one processing and selling those products, and who could be in between, for example, doing some extraction at the coastline, at the limit, at the connection between the seawater and the mangrove, who are also typically women. So unless we come up with this honest approach to trying to understand who are within this value chain, who are the different actors, we would be coming to our projects with our own assumptions. And the difficulty with it is that we would fail to really respond to the needs of the people that we're working with. So if we are trying to think, and I'll leave this here to you because the time is limited, but if we're looking at the different topics, thematic priorities for this call, there are some very interesting and kind of basic questions that you can still start asking yourselves when you're preparing for this work. So if we're talking about climate, peace, and security, it's not only about what are the climatic implications that we can foresee, but how is this affecting the situation of other peoples? If we're in a drought situation where we know water will be scarce, and we know that traditional roles may dictate that it's women and girls, the ones who would be engaged in this water collection, right? And we know that when there is this collection, they tend to be more exposed to gender violence, even to attacks from animals, right? So how is it that we are thinking about our work to ensure water access in a way that is safer for these women and girls, in a way that it allows them still to maybe have a social connection and a moment of communication among themselves that is safe? How is it possible that we bring then that understanding of vulnerabilities and of conflict to the work that you are doing? Or how are we rethinking architecture so that whatever kind of possibilities that you're considering are taking into account the care burden? And I talk a lot about care burden because, unfortunately, when we're thinking particularly of women, we tend to expect that women will take care of children, of the elderly, of the sick, again, an element that may increase because of climate change. And if we're thinking about architecture for adaptation, we need to make sure that spaces for social cohesion, but also for providing this care, for preparing the food, that they're taken as much importance and that they're lighted and aired as much as many other spaces. And why do I say this? Because it's very it's very important for you to make sure that if you are engaging with these groups, that you need to take into account the needs. I'm thinking about also safety measures when you're developing your architectural proposals, where the lighting is, how safe it is to go to the toilets, to spaces where people may be in a vulnerable position. These are elements that you need to consider, right? So if you're designing with women, or maybe even better, with children at the heart of what is your architectural proposition, then it is very likely that you would be able to provide architectural solutions to a population that would need it the most, but would also have the least voices to explain. I think I already gave you a couple of ideas on how to deal with this with oceans and the economy. And I guess I'll park the one from energy maybe for later. But if we're thinking about fashion also, right? How are we seeing the participation of women in the sector? It is very probably that they are quite engaged, particularly in the design, in the manufacturing, but are we making sure that for them, but also in other sectors, that we are either increasing their participation, that we are providing care support, that we are providing sufficient systems to protect them from harassment, that we are offering equal payment for the work. And this is very important. We need to make sure that whenever we are engaging with women, that we do not consider that their participation should be voluntary. I'm thinking about a project in which we were in a previous life working with water associations, in which when the positions were paid, you could find men filling in these positions. But if the positions were voluntary, they were filled by women. Or perhaps it was the other way around. Because they were women, people didn't think about recognizing their time and efforts monetarily. And for you, when you're engaging in your projects, I would highly recommend that you also consider if there is a possibility to recognize these efforts of women voluntarily. But also that whenever you are putting together your proposals, that you're thinking about what are those care challenges, that what we call the time burden, that these people would have. Because if you want to make sure that they are able to come to your trainings, to your marketing opportunities, you have to think about what is the time distribution and what are the activities through the day that these women or men may have. I am Latin American. In my continent, there would be no way an important event will be put up when a football match, soccer match for those who call the sport differently, that a football match will be, that an activity will be scheduled at a football match from the national team. There's no way, right? So why don't we do something similar for women? Why is it that we're not considering, for example, the burdens that are related to women's care for the family whenever they're bringing kids to school, preparing their meals, also recognizing the fact that they need to take care of their own selves. And whenever there are traditional meetings, religious activities that they may need to be engaged in and prepared. So it's that recognition of how the roles that we are imposing on others, and I know I've been very binary and focusing very much on women, but how is it that we are, those roles and those impositions are limiting or increasing the possibilities of a certain group of people to engage with you, and for you to be prepared to give the best to these people. through your projects. I may have come over time, Verania, I'm not sure. So let me just wrap up and hope that you have a lot of questions towards the end. When you receive the presentation, you would also have at least some um, indications of toolkits that you could look into, because one of the main things that I would encourage you to do is to get educated as to how to best engage with different social groups whenever you're doing your work. This is not only a way of improving your project and improving the benefits, but it's also a way of improving yourself as a human being. Whenever we are looking into and trying to understand the position of other persons, we're also growing in sensitivity, in empathy, and it is a personal journey that I hope you do take to heart. So with that said, I want to thank you for your presentation. I do hope that this pointers and introduction to terminology that we use has been useful, and we are here through the conversation to address any questions you may have. Over to you, Verani. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anna, for the practical recommendations and the explanation of key concepts such as, gender equality mainstreaming versus gender parity. And also for providing concrete references to sector-specific considerations. I'm sure this, will be very relevant for our participants to consider when starting thinking and then developing their proposals. So thank you so much, Anna. So let me now move to the next speaker. So the next speaker will talk about Indigenous peoples' rights and inclusion. So our colleague Manja Bayang, who is the climate change, Indigenous peoples and local communities specialist at the UNDP Climate Hub, will talk more about meaningful inclusion and Indigenous peoples' knowledge and engagement and the key role that they play in climate action and biodiversity conservation as well. So Manja, over to you. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Virania, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And thank you for joining this session. I saw in the chat, in the Q&A chat, that there's a question on who are Indigenous peoples from the perspective of the UN. Maybe I'll get into that if we still have time at the end of this presentation. But let me begin with three important facts. First, Indigenous peoples represent around 6.2% of the world's population, yet they manage around 25% of the world's land and protect most of the planet's remaining biodiversity. Second, Indigenous peoples' territories contain some of the world's most important carbon-rich forests and ecosystems, which are essential for regulating the global climate. And third, studies consistently show that deforestation rates are significantly lower in indigenous managed lands than in many other protected areas. So these statistics tell us something that is very important, that indigenous peoples are already among the most effective stewards of the planet. And today, I will talk about why Indigenous youth should apply to the Youth for Climate Call for solutions and what elements can strengthen Indigenous youth proposals or proposals of other youth organizations that impacts on Indigenous communities, and what considerations are important when working with Indigenous communities. Next slide. Um, Many indigenous cultures maintain knowledge systems that reflect centuries of experience managing forests, agriculture, water, and biodiversity sustainably. And at the same time, indigenous communities are among the most affected by climate change. Many indigenous territories are already experiencing droughts, floods, forest degradation, glacier loss, and coastal erosion. And this creates both a challenge and an opportunity. Indigenous youth are uniquely positioned to bring together ancestral knowledge and modern innovation, and they can bridge generations, technologies, and worldviews to create climate solutions that are both locally grounded and that are also globally relevant. The first major reason why the indigenous youth should apply to this call is that indigenous youth are already climate leaders. They are often at the front lines of environmental protection, biodiversity stewardship, and land defense. Indigenous youth often bring something very powerful into climate action. They understand the realities facing their communities. They have relationships with elders and knowledge holders, and they bring creativity, innovation, and new ways of thinking. By applying to this call for proposals, they gain also an opportunity to scale their existing efforts across financial and access financial and technical support and strengthen long-term community resilience. And additionally, these proposals offers visibility and recognition at national and international levels, thus opening doors for advocacy, networking, and partnership building that can uplift entire communities. The funding of opportunities of up to 30,000 US dollars can help indigenous youth transform community ideas into full-fledged sustainable solutions that protect both the environment and their cultural identity. And finally, Indigenous Youth Initiative is powerful and unique, as I mentioned earlier, because it combines several elements. It combines traditional ecological knowledge with modern technologies. The solutions are grounded in community leadership and cultural values. It revolves around protecting land, forests, water, and biodiversity. And often they bring creative approaches such as digital mapping, storytelling, social entrepreneurship, and climate education. And when these elements come together, they create solutions that are sustainable, culturally rooted, and community driven. Next slide. The next one. Next slide. So when preparing a proposal, including several key elements that reflect indigenous identity, you should include these specific elements: indigenous identity, collective worldviews, and deep ties to land. These can strengthen your submission. First, one of the most important components is describing the community's connection to its territory, its ecosystem, its landscapes, and cultural heritage sites, for example, because climate impacts are inseparable from land and identity. For indigenous peoples, everything is connected. Second, proposals should also highlight how indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge informs the climate solution or the project that you are submitting. Indigenous knowledge plays an essential role in climate solutions. This knowledge may include traditional farming practices, agroecology, forest management techniques, seasonal calendars, water management systems, and biodiversity conservation methods, even fishing techniques and traditional architecture or storytelling based education. It is very important that Indigenous knowledge is respected and protected in your proposals. That projects should recognize the role of elders and knowledge holders and ensure that knowledge is used with community consent and proper recognition. Third, it is essential to demonstrate collective leadership and decision making. Unlike individual oriented models, Indigenous youth leadership usually involves elders, women, clans, and cultural protocols guiding decisions. Proposals should show how the project will benefit the community as a whole and how the community has endorsed or co created the initiative. Fourth, applicants should also clearly describe gender inclusion. Anna has very well discussed gender in her presentation, but other than that, intergenerational participation, roles of women, girls, even LGBTQ plus members, emphasizing rights-based safeguards such as free, prior, and informed consent, or FPIC, protection of sacred knowledge, and data sovereignty. For these, all of these, they further strengthen the proposal. These elements reflect not only the cultural integrity, but also ethical, responsible, and sustainable project design. And fifth, the proposal should demonstrate community ownership. Successful initiatives are those that emerge from the priorities of the community itself. It should show that communities have been consulted and involved from the beginning. Communities should participate in decision making and implementation. And when communities feel ownership of a project, its impact becomes much more sustainable and long lasting. Next slide. So, for all proposals, next one. For all proposals submitted that impact on Indigenous communities, they must always incorporate strong rights based protections. This inclusion will respect Indigenous peoples' collective rights over land, resources, knowledge, and cultural heritage. One essential safeguard is, as I mentioned, the free, prior, and informed consent, FPIC, which ensures that the community has had enough information, enough time, and freedom to decide whether to support the project. FPIC is not just a signature, it is a process rooted in in respect for self-determination. Proposals should also describe how they will protect sacred, sensitive, or restricted knowledge, acknowledging that not all knowledge is meant to be shared publicly or with external partners. Including customary governance structures is also crucial, as many indigenous communities have established systems of leadership. They have conflict resolution and some decision making that can also guide the project. Data sovereignty is another important safeguard. Indigenous communities must retain control over their data, stories, cultural expressions, and any outcomes generated from their participation. And these protections help prevent exploitation, appropriation, and tokenism. So it allows the project to be grounded really in dignity, respect, and community empowerment. So these tips that we have on the screen apply to both Indigenous youth organizations and other organizations whose proposals impact on Indigenous communities. So as we've mentioned, proposals should start by grounding climate solution in real community needs identified through dialogue with elders, leaders, women, and youth. Funders usually appreciate proposals that demonstrate authenticity, clarity, and feasibility rather than complexity. So applicants should aim to integrate indigenous knowledge and modern innovation, showing how both can work together to enhance climate adaptation or mitigation. Creating a simple, achievable plan with clear steps and realistic timelines is often more effective than ambitious but impractical designs. Budgets should also be transparent and straightforward, listing costs that directly support community activities, training, equipment, or materials is very important. Strong proposals include gender responsive approaches and highlight how women, men, youth, and elders contribute to the project's success, and including intergenerational collaboration helps demonstrate sustainability and cultural continuity. Communicating expected climate, cultural, and social impacts such as improved resilience, strengthened identity, or enhanced community cohesion also makes the proposal more compelling and aligned with funder priorities. Examples of youth projects that can demonstrate this one. One example comes from the Amazon region, where Indigenous youth organizations have used community mapping and mobile technology to document forest loss and illegal activities. By combining traditional knowledge with digital tools, they help protect their territories while strengthening community governance. And they are addressing the need of the community to address the forest loss and illegal activities. Another example can be from the Arctic indigenous youth who have been documenting changes in sea ice, wildlife migration, and weather patterns. By combining traditional knowledge with scientific data, they have contributed to climate research and local adaptation planning. So these examples show how Indigenous youth are already developing solutions that connect knowledge, culture, and innovation. And projects like this are exactly the kinds of ideas that initiatives like Youth4Climate would surely aim to support. And next slide. So I will not take this very long. Those are I was focusing on the practical ones. If you have any questions, let me know. But let me close with final reflection that the climate crisis is not only a technological challenge, it is also a question of values, our relationship with nature, how we care for our planet. And indigenous communities have long understood that humans are part of nature, not separate from it, and everything is interconnected. Indigenous youth today are bringing this wisdom forward while also creating new solutions for the future. So I strongly really encourage all indigenous youth organizations listening today and those organizations working with indigenous communities. Your knowledge matters, your leadership matters, and your ideas matters. And initiatives like Youth for Climate exist to support those ideas. The call for solutions is not simply a funding opportunity, it is a platform to assert indigenous leadership at global levels, share powerful stories, and influence climate policy and action. Thank you very much, and I hope I was within the time, Viranya. Over to you, Viranya.
Yes, thank you so much, Manja, for reminding us of the vital role Indigenous peoples play in climate action and the importance of their territories, knowledge, and cultures in managing and protecting crucial ecosystems on our planet. So thank you so much for sharing your experience and these different elements that will be very relevant for our participants to consider in their proposals. We will now move to a panel discussion. So two more colleagues will be joining us in this next segment. The first intervention will be an experience sharing by an Indigenous youth climate leader. So it is my pleasure to give the floor to Diana Blanco, who is a Youth Climate 2024 awardee from Bolivia. Diana, thank you so much for joining us today. And please, you have the floor. Over. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. I hope everything is going well on your sides. I am Diana and I'm an Indigenous woman from Bolivia. And also I am a Youth4Climate 2024 awardee. And today I want to share with you the main motivations that we had for applying to this amazing opportunity that value the voices of young Indigenous peoples. So I want to start by saying that as young Indigenous peoples that maybe we are considering to apply to this opportunity, we need to have a motivation, but also we need to have a project idea. In our case, our main motivation was restoring our Lake Uru Uru, one of one of Bolivia's most polluted wetlands that are being affected by illegal mining activities, climate pollution, and also the plastic pollution. So in that sense, our project was tackling these issues or is tackling these issues by planting native aquatic plants that are called totoras. So those totoras act like natural purifiers for restoring the lake's polluted waters. So those are the first skills and also tools that we need for applying to this opportunity. That is our motivation, but also showing the idea that we are implementing in our communities. So next slide, please. In this case, as I mentioned, our project approach was based on our traditional knowledge of our community, where we have shown to the Youth4Climate Award how we were like solving this issue that is happening in our community. Like you can see in the pictures, the lake is totally polluted by plastic, but our solution was rooted in implementing native aquatic plants into the lake's polluted waters. Then also we have demonstrated how we were like continuing with our community practices, but also with our culture by continuing with this knowledge that our ancestors has taught to us. So another point for us that was very important to demonstrate as young Indigenous people is how these issues that are happening and urgent matters that are affecting Indigenous peoples needs to be tackled, solving other parallel problems that are happening. In this case, for example, when the lake has started to be polluted, we have lost our food sovereignty. So for us, another pillar of our project was building community gardens. And in this sense, the community gardens has helped us to recover our main right, that is the food sovereignty. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I am going to the point. How was our experience with the Youth4Climate Award? Also, we have participated from many like phases of the project. First, we also have connected to this kind of webinars. We had like the mentorship sessions. And for us, the application process was very respectful. We felt like indigenous perspectives are valued in these processes, but also it is very important for the Youth4Climate Award to show and also to see how we as indigenous peoples are respecting the main rights that we have. For example, one right that we have is the free, prior, and informed consent. So how we are respecting that right for running our projects and also the different solutions that we are applying in this process. So another point that maybe we had as a feedback in the mentorship session that we have with the Youth4Climate Award was to show how we are involving our community, all the members of our community. So for us, it was connecting with our community workshops that we are organizing, and also showing how these workshops can be helpful for like decision-making processes, but also for continuing with our solution, sharing with the next generations of our community. Next slide, please. Okay, so in this case, we are involving our community through workshops, as I have mentioned, and also we allow all the members to be part of these community workshops where kids, young people, elders are part of these workshops that we organize. Like you can see, for example, in the photo, we like do different kind of activities that are focused on helping us to solve the different like urgent matters that I have mentioned in the beginning, and also advance with more solutions. So in these workshops also for us it's very important to share our knowledge with the next generations, but also to involve all the members for being part of the decision-making processes. It helps us to build the ownership and also the responsibility for the project, and also for the continuity of our project in the next following years. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as you know, the Youth4Climate Award, it has many phases, but we are right now in the phase number 1, where we are organizing our logistics and also our community workshops. And also we are preparing for the next phase of the project implementation. And as I said in the beginning, our main goal is continuing restoring our Lake Ururu using our traditional knowledge as Indigenous peoples. So if there are many Indigenous peoples that are connected right now in this webinar, I will encourage all of you to apply to this great opportunity, because this is the place where your perspectives, your knowledge is very valuable for tackling those urgent matters that are happening in your community. So thank you so much. With that, I want to conclude with my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Diana. Really, thank you for sharing your firsthand experience at the local level in your community, which certainly has a broader positive impact. We have heard from our previous panelists, we are a social and environmental ecosystem, so we are all connected. And as a matter of fact, I see already comments in the chat saying, Diana, I want to connect with you. I want to learn from your experience. So this is also an opportunity. And as Manja mentioned, it's a platform for you to connect with each other. So that's great. Let me move to the next speaker. So I'm gonna come back to Anna with a specific question. And Anna, so based on your work and experience at the intersection of gender equality and renewable energy and climate change sector, what are the most frequent mistakes or pitfalls climate projects make when it comes to gender, integration and inclusion, and how can young innovators proactively design climate solutions that are gender transformative? So let's connect with Anna once again, and then we move to the next participant. Over to you, Anna. Thank you.
Thanks, Berania. And Manja said something that made me reflect, and I want to bring that in. Because this is a pitfall that I've seen not only on renewable energy projects, but in many other projects. We see that when we start the design of projects, we're very good at explaining, and we should have a gender equality and social inclusion objective. But then when we start looking at the proposals, we see that this clear objective starts fading and doesn't necessarily translate into clear activities that would make us achieve this objective. Budget, technical support or assistance, and then the indicators that we may use tend to be at best sex disaggregated. So again, trying to figure out who was there and what is the sex of the gender of these people, but not necessarily capturing results that could be more interesting, like changes in income as part of our activities. And I wanted to put it out there because when we are doing this social inclusion work, we need to be consistent and make sure that we are addressing it through the project. So even though this is not unique to energy projects, I would definitely put it out there for you to consider when you're writing your proposals. I think the other element that is very strong in the energy projects is that we assume that because this is a technology, that it would automatically benefit everyone equally. And unfortunately, the truth is that our gender roles may limit the way that we interact with these technologies, how secure, how safe we may feel interacting with these technologies, or even the fact if we can decide to invest in clean energy technologies. And this goes back to the beginning of the presentation, right? It could be that we are having access to the information that you're putting out there about your renewable energy technologies. But if women, if different people from the households do not have the capacity to decide how to invest family budgets, how to invest their own income into these technologies, you're not going to go very far off. Another element that is a pitfall from energy projects is that because there might be an understanding that this is a technology, this is technology, it's mainly for men, and only men could understand it, we may also fail to provide key information about operations and maintenance of the energy systems that we are putting out there. And this is at the surface, of course, to the users that we want to reach, but also for you and for the project's efficiency point of view, it's also at the surface. Because then the main users, who would be the ones who are engaged in the household, will not have the tools to implement properly the technology. Think about the batteries, they're going to die, run off in a shorter lifespan if not used properly, right? So these are elements that you could consider that are very prominent in the energy sector, but not only there. When we're talking about agriculture, again, extension services could become just a man-to-man conversation, forgetting that women are heavily working on agriculture, particularly for sustenance production. And again, if we're not ensuring that this information is socialized in a more democratic manner, we are failing our users, but we are also failing ourselves. And I guess from the energy perspective, understanding that productive energy uses, again, shaped by the social roles that we have in societies, mean that we require different energy solutions, and that a lot of the livelihoods for women, particularly in contexts where energy access is not a given, they are related to cooking and heating productions, where electricity may not be the most efficient or still the cheapest option. So really thinking about what is that connection with cooking, with heating needs, and being able to provide, to size the mini grids or to size the systems that you're implementing to also address those needs that may be unspoken, that families may consider not necessary because they're free related to women's time. Those are all elements that I would encourage you to bring in. And I see Verania, so I need to just shift very promptly to transformative versus responsive, which is a concept we didn't speak before. When we are talking about responsive solutions, we're talking about changing behaviors, about changing social norms, which is a much more ambitious situation than when we're talking about gender responsiveness in our projects, which means that we have identified a gap, an inequality, and we're working towards it. One is slighter, shorter term, the other one's more longer term. And I think that one of the ways that you can start working towards this transformation is not only by acknowledging that this is a long path that you want to work with, but to start engaging in with decision makers, with community leaders, to see how best through conversations, through you becoming role models, through bringing in role models that could change this attitudes and these behaviors, how that fits within the project that you're having. Because this is the challenge for the long run. We are creatures of habit, and changing our habits is difficult, not impossible. And if you start by yourselves and bringing in others who have been able to change habits, to change paradigms, images, I think you will be on the right path in your project. Over to you, Irania.
Thank you, Anna, for covering, a very important sector, energy. It's crucial for development, but also, it's determinant when it comes to, different conditions that even relate to peace and security, as we know. So let me now move to our colleague Miriam Castillo. Miriam is one of the Indigenous youth leaders that we have worked with. So Miriam is a member of the International Indigenous Youth Forum on Climate Change. So Miriam, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. And let me ask you a question. Indigenous youth often navigate a dual responsibility, honoring ancestral knowledge while advancing new innovations. How does this dual identity shape the way you design climate solutions? And what should funders understand about the collective nature of Indigenous youth leadership? So the floor is yours, Miriam. Over to you. Thank you.
Verania, thank you so much. Thanks so much to the UNDP team for inviting the International Indigenous Youth Forum to participate in this event. And first of all, if there are any Indigenous youth present, I would definitely encourage you to be part of this program, to apply to this program. I think it's such a wonderful nurturing experience to get involved Indigenous perspectives within climate decision making. And coming back to Verania's question, I want to point out that Indigenous youth are extremely important links between knowledge that has historically been marginalized as Indigenous knowledge with new future decision-making processes. And I think our knowledge is so essential for building responses to climate change that are not only adequate to the climate science, but also to social and the complexities embedded in climate challenges. So I would like to point out that as Indigenous youth, we serve as bridges because we have our traditions, our systems of knowledge that have been nurtured by our ancestors for thousands of years and that we have been bringing through generations, but now we have to put it in the present solutions. So we are the future in the sense that we carry both knowledge, right? We are walking these two worlds, and we also speak different languages. We carry the knowledge of managing different technologies such as these, right? The Zoom, or like we can speak English, or we can speak French, we can speak Portuguese. There are many tools that we carry with us. And as also Marianne was pointing out earlier, I think that we need to keep pushing the resistance towards not forgetting who we are as carriers of traditional, but not also like only like ancient knowledge, but also very valuable knowledge to this day. Diana was showing us what Indigenous knowledge can do today to bring solutions to climate issues. And the engagement of Indigenous peoples do not only has to be like, oh, we will include you in the table, right? It's not only a matter of inclusivity, it's a matter of how we are also going to shape the decisions, because most of these issues are happening within our lands, and we have to have a say about what happens in them. And that includes prior and informed consent, former prior informed consent, and also respecting the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which is an amazing tool that has been developed with lots of effort from our previous elders to be able to come to this point and have every tool, international tool, to say Indigenous knowledge must be respected, Indigenous rights need to be respected, Indigenous peoples need to be respected and considered within international, national, and domestic climate solutions, because we are in the front lines of it. So I just want to thank you so much for allowing me to speak about this. Thank you very much, Verania, and all the UNDP team for being such amazing supporters for Indigenous youth. And definitely, I deeply encourage all Indigenous youth that might be listening right now that you should apply to this, and you should allow yourself to carry with the work of our ancestors and continuing to thrive with Mother Earth. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Miriam. It's such a pleasure, listen to your words. I mean, for reminding us of the relevance of Indigenous knowledge in finding, building, and shaping climate solutions, and also the critical role that Indigenous youth play as bridges, as you mentioned, and knowledge holders as well. So bringing kind of like all of these different experiences and knowledge together. So thank you so much, Miriam. Let me now then come back to our colleague Manja. So Manja, I will share with you a question, and we would be happy to hear your thoughts about this. So many young innovators, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, are eager to integrate Indigenous knowledge into their climate solutions. What ethical considerations, cultural sensitivities, and free, prior, and informed consent related responsibilities must they understand, especially when working with knowledge systems that are collective, intergenerational, and deeply tied to land and identity? So over to you, Manja. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Viranya. I think Miriam has also covered some of these aspects, including respect in the traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and the key principle that must guide the whole process is free, prior, and informed consent that Miriam has also mentioned. And let me briefly expound this further and what it means in practice. Free means that communities can make decisions without pressure or coercion. And prior means that consultation happens early before the project is designed or implemented. Informed means that the communities clearly understand the purpose of the project, how their knowledge will be used, and what the potential impacts or benefits may be. And consent means that communities have the right to say yes, to say no, or to request changes to the projects. Another important consideration is recognition and benefit sharing. If Indigenous knowledge contributes to a project, the community should be acknowledged as partners, not as mere beneficiaries. And the benefits of the project should also reach them. This includes opportunities for Indigenous youth leadership, community participation, and local capacity building. Young innovators should also recognize that some knowledge may not be appropriate to document, publish, or share publicly, particularly when it is sacred or culturally sensitive. So, respecting these boundaries is an important part of ethical collaboration. And finally, the most meaningful climate solutions really emerge not from extracting knowledge, but from building long term relationships of trust and partnership with Indigenous communities. So, and when projects are co-created with Indigenous peoples that respect their rights, governance systems, and cultural values, they become stronger, more legitimate, and more sustainable. So the key message is that indigenous knowledge should never be treated as a resource to be used. It should be respected as a living system of knowledge held by communities who have the right to decide how it is shared and applied. So when we approach collaboration with that respect, we not only protect indigenous people's rights, we also build better climate solutions. Over Virginia. Really wanted to answer some couple of questions, but if it's not the time, I can wait for that
You
time.
have two
Over to you.
minutes. So if you want to, you have 2
Okay,
minutes. Yeah.
because there was a question about who indigenous peoples are according to the UN. Defining indigenous peoples is not the role of the UN. Uh, but there are some indicators or criteria on how to identify who indigenous peoples are. And under international law, there is no single definition of the word indigenous peoples or who indigenous peoples are because indigenous peoples are so diverse and you cannot come up with just one single definition that applies to everyone. So, considering this diversity, the UN system uses a set of criteria that were identified by indigenous peoples themselves. And the most important thing is self-identification as indigenous peoples. The group must identify themselves as indigenous peoples and they should be recognized as indigenous peoples by others. They have historical continuity with pre-colonial or pre-settler societies. They have strong link, and this is very important, the strong link to territories and the surrounding natural system, natural resources. They have their ancestral domains, their ancestral lands, and they have distinct social, economic, or political systems that is different from the mainstream systems. They have their own languages, they have their own culture and beliefs. And most often, they form the non-dominant groups of society. Although in a couple of countries, they are dominant in terms of population, but mostly they are non-dominant groups. And they resolve to maintain and reproduce their ancestral environments and system as distinct people and communities. So different criteria on how to how to determine or how to identify who indigenous peoples are. And then there is the question on how can governments integrate traditional knowledge and modern technology in climate solutions. So I can answer this now or maybe later.
Yeah, maybe in the next round.
Okay,
Yeah.
in the
Thank
in the
you.
later.
So
Okay.
yes. Thank you so much, Manja, for recapitulating the relevance of free, prior, and informed consent principle as a clear guiding tool and process, and how this principle supports building trust and ensure equitable benefit sharing. So thank you. Let me now move to our last part of today's webinar. So we have a second round of question, and I'm really happy to come back to you, Diana. And I also want to share a question. So, in your experience, what does meaningful engagement actually look like in practice beyond checklist or representation? And how can youth-led climate solutions ensure inclusion shapes decision making and not just participation as a one-stand activity? So, Diana, over to you, and then we will move to the Q&A. Over.
Thank you, Verania. I will share with that answer. I think like the most important is to include all indigenous members of our community through the different practices that we have beyond the checklist that you have mentioned. In this case, for example, we have traditional practices like the cabildo and these meetings that can help us to include and also to have these meetings that are rooted in intergenerational knowledge, but also that helps us to build that respect for our elders, but also for the next generations. And how we can like maybe include this knowledge in the climate youth-led solutions is transferring this knowledge to the next generations, but also to continuing with the knowledge that our ancestors has taught to us. In this case, for example, in our project, we are implementing something that we have learned from our ancestors. In the past, they have used the native aquatic plants called totoras for purifying waters. But now we are using that knowledge in the urgent matter that we are living right now in the Lake Uru Uru. So that is the way how we can show in tangible implementation the solutions that have been always rooted in the traditional knowledge, customs, and practices of our communities. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Diana. So let's now move to the Q&A. We have received already a few questions. So thank you so much, colleagues, for being so active in the chat and in the Q&A box. I think some of the questions have been answered by our participants. But let me share a couple of questions here, and then I will open the floor for our speakers to respond, and then we can move to the next round of questions. So I'm gonna read a couple of or a few questions. As I mentioned, some of them may have already been answered in a way or partially. So I will see if our speakers wants to add anything else. So there is one about how can policymakers effectively integrate indigenous knowledge with scientific climate solutions while ensuring that indigenous communities receive recognition and benefits for their contributions. So I think Diana touched upon these and Manja, but I'll just see if there is anything else to add. Then let me look into another one. There is also a question around how UNDP protects women and children in conflict context. I guess this is a bit more context specific, but we'll see, Anna, if you have any general kind of comments. Otherwise, I can also come in on this. Then let me just look at a third one, which is about there is a rampant carbon credit business influxing into indigenous territories, and the worst part of it is that it does not observe FPIC. How can we help IPs to handle these newly abrupt phenomena? So let me start with this. Maybe I can give the floor to Manja and Diana to respond the questions related to this area. But of course, feel free to also touch upon other colleagues, and then I'll move to other aspects, and then I'll move to other colleagues such as Anna to share a few thoughts about the third one. Colleagues, please, we have like 1 or 2 minutes to respond. So over to you, Diana and Manja.
Thank you very much, Verania. I'll go first. In relation to the carbon markets, I think that's a totally big topic that needs a lot of time as well for discussion. But I posted on the chat that 13 question and answer on carbon markets in relation to indigenous peoples, and there are some resources there that you can use to reference and to read more in relation to carbon markets and indigenous peoples. And I agree, it is another challenge for indigenous peoples in relation to how can governments integrate indigenous knowledge uh, and modern technology into climate solutions. I think what the major thing here is how to for governments to integrate them in climate policies, in laws, to make policies and laws that really integrate indigenous knowledge and technological innovations. I think it would be best explained how this looks like in practice. For instance, there's an experience in Peru and Ecuador where indigenous peoples using geospatial tech to protect forests. It's well documented. It's from the Awajun people of Peru and the Ashuar Nation of Ecuador. These indigenous communities combine their deep ecological knowledge with advanced geospatial and earth observation technologies to protect their territories from climate driving threats such as deforestation. So, what was the indigenous knowledge contributed? first generations of traditional forest stewardship practices, detailed understanding of forest health, wildlife behavior, patterns, and ecosystem changes. And then they have community-led territorial monitoring that is grounded in cultural values and relationships to the land. So that's the body of indigenous knowledge that was contributed to the whole project. What was the modern technology used? Geospatial tools and satellite data. This is via NASA-supported Earth observations for indigenous-led land management. And then we have the training in mapping, remote sensing, and digital reporting system to track illegal logging and encroachment in real time. So this traditional knowledge and the technologies combined together, what is the impact? Improved forest monitoring and rapid detection of forest hotspots. Strengthened land governance because it enabled communities to document evidence and present it to authorities. And it enhanced climate resilience by protecting forests, it preserves carbon sinks and safeguards biodiversity. So this collaboration is a practical example of how integration can be done. Over to you, Diana or Virania.
Yes, I'll give the floor to Diana, but maybe Diana, let me add another question that I think you are very well placed to answer. The question is: many grassroots organizations working closely with vulnerable communities struggle to access climate finance. What mechanisms or partnerships can help small community-based organizations effectively access or collaborate on Youth4Climate proposals? So, Diana, maybe you also want to provide some insights on this, and then I'll move to Anna. Thank you.
Thank you, Verania. Yes, I think like for indigenous peoples, but also for young people, lack of funding is a main problem. But I think like the entry point in this case, as a recommendation from our personal experience, is to build partnerships locally with different institutions, with the academia sector, and try to strengthen those partnerships in the local stage. And then we can escalate to the international stage. For example, in this case, our steps were like build those partnerships in local, but then we built with the Youth4Climate Award and also with other organizations. So I will encourage all of you to build these partnerships in your countries, and then you can go to the international scale. Or even though if right now you have the opportunity to apply to this Youth4Climate Award, you can do that. And if you will not be selected this time, please don't be disappointed. Try again. And in the meantime, you can build those national and local coalitions with other organizations. So that would be my recommendation.
Great. Thank you, Diana. So let me now Anna, before giving you the floor, maybe another question that you could perhaps respond, and this is about given the strong influence of cultural and religious values in many African indigenous communities or local communities, how can humanitarian and development practitioners navigate the tensions between respecting these values and ensuring inclusive and equitable support? I wanted you to cover this because we know this is always a tricky point when it comes to gender equality. So over to you, Anna. Thank you.
Thanks, Verania. I think you've given me like two of the most difficult questions to answer. So let's give it a try. Let's start by how UNDP works in crisis settings. I think it's very important to mention that there is within UNDP's global gender team, there are colleagues who are specifically working on the intersection of gender equality in conflict areas and in crisis areas. So when UNDP is supporting governments because of course we come at the invitation of governments, we deploy a series of tools that from implementation would ensure that gender equality and protection, I think the question was also about children, that this are taking into account. On the slides, there's one link, but I'm going to mention anyway. From our website, you can find at least the gender responsive conflict analysis, which is a tool that you could bring in so that whenever you're understanding vulnerabilities and conflict in the country you're working, you're also applying a gender lens. But there's also this gender recovery toolkit that you could take a look into to get an idea of tools that are available that you could use. Apart from that, country offices work very strongly on supporting projects against gender-based violence. Among the tools that one sees employed is this nonviolent communication approach, in which community members, women, men, are sensitized about how to communicate differently. And this is a way in which you, through communication, through mediation, can deal with addressing gender roles in a way that feels less confrontational, maybe, and also improves, by improving communication and the way that we react to one another. This has proven to be a key instrument for reducing conflict and for reducing violence in different situations. And I guess this is also a good lead to how do we deal with cultural and religious norms. And this, the way that colleagues and practitioners do is by having a very strong and open approach and communication, not only with heads of family, but also engagement with these religious leaders, with clan leaders, with community leaders, to start gaining their support also. And this has proven very, very valuable. Perhaps the example that we tend to show the most when we're working on the energy sector is the case of colleagues working in Yemen, which by working together with the families, engaging fathers, engaging husbands into understanding why it was important for women to become energy technicians, but also elevating that to engagement with imams, with municipality leaders, and all the way to the top. You create a system that is more open to the conversation, and where then backlash could be reduced. But I mean, through the board, whenever we speak with colleagues, I'm also thinking about the context in Sudan. I recently spoke with colleagues there, again, in Somalia, sorry. This is one of the ways that they do take into account to have open, sustained conversations with these leaders, because if and when you can make them accept the changes and the work that you want to do, then it's easier to get the community behind. So I would say think about role models, and also spotlighting the men who are allies. I think definitely I have not spoken about that today, but this is also something that's very relevant, right? So also making sure that these families are becoming your allies and your advocates helps to make sure that we are increasing the engagement of women in in economic activities, in decision-making opportunities. I think I'll leave it there, but Verania, please round up whatever I may have missed out.
Thank you. Thank you. And yes, I think this last point, I think gender equality needs to be in the benefit of everyone, and it's not in the detriment of anyone. And this is something that, sometimes it needs some sensitization. So it's good to hear from you in that sense. I saw a question about what is a credit, carbon credit and climate finance. So I'm gonna drop the links in the chat for everyone to see the definitions. And let me now move to almost our final set of questions. So this is for Manja, Diana. So how can indigenous peoples be? Well, this is a question that I wanted to say that it's a very important question because in many cases cause some confusion and it should not. So this is so it's about if indigenous peoples or the reference to indigenous peoples can be used interchangeably with local people, or I guess also local communities, or if there is a difference in the definition of these. And I think it's really important because it has to do with what some of the speakers already touch upon. But let's please provide additional information and guidance on this. So over to you, Diana and Manja.
Okay, this maybe Diana will complement what I will say. Uh, but yeah, indigenous peoples, maybe local communities, but not all local communities are indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples, they have clear recognition under international law. We have the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that clearly identify, that clearly lay down the rights of indigenous peoples. Local communities is a very broad term. It can include just any community, even urban community, rural community is part of a local community. It does not have a clear legal definition under international law. So can we use this interchangeably? Definitely no. You cannot use these two terms interchangeably because these are two different terms, especially and even under international law. One has a clear definition or understanding, and then one does is not even uh, there's no clear like definition. Um, Although we have to also recognize that indigenous peoples, the term indigenous peoples is not used in every setting. Like, for example, there are so many other terms that refer to indigenous peoples, especially at the local, at the national level. We have hill tribes, we have ethnic minorities, and in some instances, there are indigenous peoples that are referred to as local communities by the state themselves, but in reality these are indigenous peoples. So we have to be very cautious about when we use the term local communities and when we use the term indigenous peoples, but we do not interchange this. This does not mean the same thing. So maybe Diana can add to that.
Yes, I think like Manja has explained very well the terms, and I think if you are specifically here applying to the Youth for Climate Award, you need to be very specific describing if you belong to an indigenous community, because we know that according to each country, it could be different. For example, here we have indigenous community, but also we have here provincias. So we need to be very specific describing that and also mentioning the terms according to our context and also according to our country. So yeah, I will add that. And thank you, Brania.
Great. Well, thank you so much to our panelists today, to the participants that, they have been very, very active in the chat, asking questions. I think we are basically at the end of our webinar. So just wanted to take this opportunity to thank everyone. I hope we covered most of your questions. I believe additional resources will be shared and will be posted in the Youth for Climate platform website. So let me just see if there is anything from the organizer side that we should or that we would like to announce. So Roxani, is there anything else before I close the session today?
Rania, no, thank you so much to all speakers, to our interpreters today. We've been through 3 rounds of deep dive webinars now, introducing the guidelines of the call for solutions, the different thematic areas we've opened up. And today's webinar, the recordings and resources will be posted on the platform space. The link has been shared a few times in the chat. And next, we're opening up our one-to-one support offer, so you can register for a session on work planning and budgeting with somebody who can guide you through that. And then in a few days' time, we'll be going going through a second series of workshops on project design, business readiness, and policy readiness, which can also help to strengthen your proposal. And great to see a lot of great questions today in the chat about carbon markets and other topics. And we'll be bringing these to you as well in other webinars throughout the year, since there's a lot of topics that seem to be of interest to this community. So yeah, thank you for your attention and best of luck with your applications.
Great. Thank you, Roxani. So again, colleagues, for the panelists, the speakers, thank you so much for your interventions and your time. For the participants, thank you so much for your interest. And please do apply, do devote time to prepare a good proposal. And good luck, everyone. Have a good day. Thank you. Or evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Verania, Anna, Manja. Bye. Thank you.